G'day, I'm Scott Poynton and welcome to another podcast. It's been a long time since I've made a podcast, but it gives me great pleasure today to start a new podcast series with Hank Lynch. And Hank is the CEO of One Tree Planted, a fantastic organisation that's based in the US doing amazing work worldwide to plant trees and to restore forests and working with communities. And I've been keeping a close eye on the work of One Tree Planted for the last 10 years since they first started. The organisation is just past 10 years old. They've done a lot of great things. And we're going to catch up with Hank today just to go over some of the history of the organisation, but also to talk about their plans for the future. And in this time where we have climate change, many challenges, forests disappearing around the world, the work of One Tree Planted is just so important. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to Hank. How are you, Hank?
Thank you, Scott. I'm doing really well. It's a pleasure to be here, and I very much appreciate your kind words. So thank you.
Yeah, no worries. I'd love to know about your journey to your role here in One Tree Planted. But just tell us about One Tree Planted first and foremost, and what the organisation does and what it's been doing for the last 10 years.
It's a very interesting story. It did indeed start just a little over 10 years ago. It started as an idea by the founder, Matt Hill. And his notion was, let's make the complicated story of the landscape and climate and trees, let's make it pretty simple. And he came up with this concept to introduce it to planting trees to a much broader audience. And he came with the idea of the name One Tree Planet, and he came up with the concept of $1 can plant one tree. And it really took off. It took off like gangbusters. And I commend him for it because what it actually did was make, as you know, Scott, a fairly complicated scenario that and very site-specific issues that have to be dealt with. He made it so that the average person, one, was paying attention to it, and two, could find a way to support it. It started off a little bit slow, but by 2018, 2019, they really started to get some rhythm, started to work with major corporations around the world, literally, and to help them with their ESG goals, their climate goals, and to a certain degree, their carbon sequestration goals. And it's been going like gangbusters ever since. Over the history of the organization, over its 10-year period, it's. And I don't like to talk about tree planting numbers because I think we're all in agreement that we're here to restore landscapes. But the organization has planted well over 130 million trees, but more importantly, restored landscapes that needed restoration for a variety of reasons of over 200,000 hectares, which is significant. There's still plenty of work to be done, but it's a very, very impressive story.
It is an impressive story, and we'll come back to those tree planting stats in a minute. But this goal of engaging just normal people to get involved in the tree planting. I mean, what sort of numbers have you got there, Hank? How many people have given a donation to One Tree Planted? How many people have had this awareness raised of the importance of trees? I think that's another wonderful side benefit that the organisation's created.
The way it happened is the founder was a very strong marketing person and brought together a very, very strong marketing team. And so they started to tell heartwarming stories, positive stories, and in many cases, funny stories. And if you look at our following, I think just last month, we had over almost 1 million people in one way or another touch our organization on social media. We have a following of a couple 100,000, and they do it because they get good content. We're talking about human stories. We're not just talking about restoring landscapes or planting individual trees, but we talk about how important this is to and vital to local communities. We put the people part to it. And we also just ran, sometimes we run humorous stories. We just ran a series of videos, I should say, a program on what we call stick factories, which were trees. So and people it was really pretty funny, and but it's the sort of thing that attracts the audience to learn more, and in many respects, they will give us a couple of dollars of support to thousands upon thousands of dollars of support. It's to me, I've been shocked by the results, but also so pleasantly encouraged by them because of the warm reception we are getting. And in the industry, and I use that I don't mean the word industry the way it came out, but there is a collection of organizations that do the kind of work that we're doing. They have all complimented us on our communications and are trying to follow our lead and how we communicate, because they've all recognized that has made a big difference in opening up what needs to be done to a much broader audience.
It's amazing. And so let's talk about those trees.
It's over 130 million trees that have been planted over the last 10 years.
Amazing.
And it's over 200,000 hectares. Just to give you an example, this year we're going to be doing a total of 85 projects. We're engaged right now in 62 of them. And you have, as you have certain seasons depending on the north or south of the equator or when you can work. We've got 62 in process right now. We've got another 30 or so that are going to take place. We're working in about 42 countries. We divide them into zones, or what we call landscape regions that we want to focus on. And those are North America, Europe, Asia Pacific, Africa, and Latin America, and the Caribbean. I mean, I could start rattling off countries. We're working in England, Scotland, Romania, Spain, Portugal, Italy, and Hungary, just in Europe alone. We've got several large projects going on in New Zealand and Australia, India, Malaysia, Indonesia, Bangladesh. We are working as part of the AFR 100, which I don't know if everyone knows what that is, but it's really a consortium of African countries that came together several years back to restore 100 million hectares in Africa of forests that have been degraded or cut down or lost, but by 2030. And we're working with them and a lot of other companies, a lot of other organizations to support that. I think we're doing 24 projects this year in Africa, Uganda, Nigeria, Tanzania. I'm looking at my list: Kenya, Ghana, Ethiopia, and Zambia. So that's just a handful of where we're working. We have a staff here in North America, but we also have staff all over the world that kind of works with planting partners,
right?
Local communities, because the other aspect of what we're doing and why we feel so positively about it, besides biodiversity and habitat restoration, climate mitigation, addressing forest fire damage, repairing watersheds and soil, and the one of the things that I think is really oftentimes not seen by or understood by what we do is we work with the local communities, and we're having a really strong and positive social impact. Through our planting partners, we actually support anywhere between 10 to 15,000 individuals that are working to plant these trees, to grow these trees in nurseries, to ship these trees, and then to put them in the landscape, and they become bought into it. And once you plant a tree, I think we all know, you kind of think you own it, even though you may just have planted it in a field. You don't want anything to happen to it, and you start taking care of it. And that's part of building the community spirit around the work that we're doing. So.
Yeah. No, it's quite amazing. I did mean to mention in my introduction that to my great pleasure, I was invited to become a board member of One Tree Planted back in November. And, this really has been fantastic for me to learn. As I say, I've always watched One Tree Planted from afar, but coming in as a board member in this short period of time, the last few months, I've really gained a great appreciation of the work that the organisation is doing. And you say, I think 40-something countries you're working in this year, but I think overall, over the last 10 years, golly, you must have worked in, I guess, 100 countries or more, Hank. So many different places where I know you've got local partners that have been planting these trees. So, I mean, quite an amazing footprint, quite an amazing, I don't want to say legacy, but history, because there's much to do in the future. But it sounds like, the organisation can look back with a lot of pride on the work that's been done.
It really can. And first of all, thank you for coming on the board. I do, you have added an enormous amount to what we're trying to accomplish. And with your background and expertise, it's a pleasure. And really, you're helping us a lot. I just shared that we were working in a little over 40 countries this year. That is down. And it's down not because we don't have the opportunity to work in others. There have been years they've worked in 80 countries. But we're changing the approach a little bit. I think I alluded to it earlier, is the tree count is not the issue. It's really the landscape restoration and the forest restoration and how many trees actually survive. So we're changing our approach slightly from hey, help support us plant a tree, to more significantly that help us restore landscapes. And when you're restoring landscapes, you're restoring and encouraging the biodiversity. And that's a really fancy word for making sure all the wildlife is in the community. And when you have a healthy forest and healthy wildlife, healthy soil, and the water's being retained, you have a community that's thriving. And that's really what we're striving to do here. And so we've divided our focus into 5 what we call strategic sectors of the world. One is North America. That is obviously Canada and the United States. And we do a significant amount of work here. And a lot of it has to do with significant landscape restoration, and much of it with fire restoration, because as you know, it seems, and I think it's accurate, that more and more fires have been taking place in North America, especially in our West, than historically we've seen. The second major landscape we're working in is Europe. The third is Asia Pacific, then Africa, and then Latin America and the Caribbean. And by looking at each of these specific sectors or these landscapes, they all have their own unique challenges. And that's why we have folks staff in each of those areas and planting partners in each of those areas. And we're moving away from, although everyone likes to say, hey, this is how many trees we planted. But really, the important part of where we're going is these are the number of landscapes that we've restored. This is the biodiversity or biodiversity corridors that we put in that allowed wildlife to transition between major forests that still exist through agricultural areas and community areas to get to these forest pockets that they need to get to, and how we're helping communities sustain all of this. And I had a mentor once tell me that, and basically in your work as a leader, if you don't take care of your people, you're going to fail. The same thing is true when we're in the work that we're doing now. We can restore all the forests in the world, but if we don't educate the community and support them, they're not going to take care of the forest that's been planted. And so that's, in a nutshell, what we're doing.
Yeah, over the last 30 or so years that I've been working in this space since I graduated, I can't count the number of organisations that have come to me and said, we'd like some money to plant some trees. And I'd always say, okay, well, that's interesting. I'm very pro tree planting, but how many trees did you plant last year? Oh, we planted 10,000 trees. So often it's 10,000 trees. And you say, okay, well, that's terrific. And how many of those have survived? And they look at you and there's this sort of stunned silence.
Yeah.
And they say, what do you mean? And, well, you've planted them, but they don't all survive, right? And they're going, and usually they don't have the data. And I'm like, well, go out and find out how many survived and then come back and talk to me. And, people think that tree planting is a problem. Tree planting is not a problem. If all of the trees that had been planted over the last 50 years survived, the world would be covered in trees.
No.
What the problem is that it's, we're planting these trees out into pretty hostile environments. There's a reason why, these places are degraded. And often, as you say, there's been fires there. Of course, we've got climate change now. They're very dry, very hot. And if the nursery practices haven't been good, the seedlings are not very healthy, and they're put out into these landscapes where they've got very little chance of survival, because not only is it hot and dry, often there's weed problems, there's insects and all sorts of things to eat them, and then there's fire, or there's cattle, because people haven't worked with the communities, and the communities often get engaged. I've seen this. Communities get engaged in a tree planting program, and they get paid to grow the seedlings, they get paid to work in the planting process, and the day after the planting's been done and all the pictures have been taken, they go back out there and pull all the trees up or let the cows in, because that's their grazing land. And no one ever asked them, is that the right land that we should be planting trees on? Now, I think that as people have gathered those experiences, then that happens less and less these days, which is terrific. But I think, what sets one tree planted apart is that you do have local You have people out in these places where you're working, so they get to understand the local context. But even beyond that, you're working with local partners, and these are people who do understand the local communities, and they can talk to them in their own language.
Yeah.
And it's not some sort of, people from afar coming in with money to plant some trees, and they say, okay. But they have a chat to them and say, well, where would you like these trees? What tree species would you like us to plant? How can we make this work? And so I really do feel that this is something that differentiates One Tree Planted from a lot of organisations. And this holistic approach you're taking to forest restoration is so critical. So it sounds very much right to me, Hank. But there's one issue that I wanted to touch on, and I think it's absolutely crucial for the organisation going forward. You mentioned at the start this fantastic model that the founder came up with of $1 a tree,
yeah.
and it just captured people's imagination because it's easy. One tree, $1. Okay, I'll send you $10. That gives me 10 trees. But I must say that when I first learnt about One Tree Planted and this model as a forester who'd worked in all of these countries, I'm like, $1 is not enough to really establish a forest, because it's one thing to have a good quality seedling. It's another thing to get it planted in the right way and then to tend for it over the next 2 or 3 years when it it really does need a bit of love and care. That usually costs a lot more than $1. Now, people can get away with it and trees can survive. But I think, going forward, One Tree Planted likes to stand on this platform of, well, we're doing it right and we are establishing forests. We're not interested in just tree planting. We want to restore landscapes. I know that this is a bit of a burden for you, as a lot of donors are happy with the One Tree, $1 model. Can you talk to that, Hank, and what do you see as a better strategy going forward?
You're absolutely right. The way you described plant a tree for $1. It's very easy. It's very simple. A lot of businesses, corporations that get involved with this, they like to do that through and do what they call a commercial co-venture, meaning they will say, look, we think that this is a great idea, great opportunity. We're all supporting it. And what we can do is we can go to our customers and say, if you buy this specific product, we will donate $1 to plant a tree. And, it's early on, it probably did indeed work. What I'm involved with now is speaking to all of our organizations of support, and there's hundreds of them. And I'm making a lot of these calls personally to explain to them that doesn't necessarily work. In some parts of Africa, there might be 1 or 2 countries where you can do it for $1, but the price varies wherever you are in the world. It varies what the site conditions are, what the prep work requires to get the site ready, what has to be done after the planting to make sure that as many of the trees can survive as it makes it a valuable project. And this varies from wherever you're working on the planet. And so what we're doing now is educating all of our supporters and explaining this to them. And some have come to me and said, well, we've been doing this for years. Why can't you keep doing it? And my point back to them is, you sell a product. Do you not from time to time have to raise the price? And they get a smile on their face and they agree. But that's really what we're working on doing is educating our base of support that we can indeed, because the other aspect that's going on right now, first I commend the companies and organizations for doing it, but I think they're all starting to look at climate issues mitigation a little bit differently than they did 5 years ago. But 5 years ago, a lot of companies made a public statement that they're going to plant X number of trees by 2030. This is just like I shared earlier with AFR 100. They want to plant 100 million trees, 100 million hectares in Africa by 2030. And there's a lot of pressure to come up with a number. We're going to continue to support those companies in doing that. It's just that we've shared with them that we will have to adjust the price per tree depending on where they want to install them. And for the most part, everybody understands and is supporting it. So that's one of the things we're doing. The other thing we're also starting to try to educate all of our supporters and all of our donors around is going back to what I shared earlier. If you don't support the people, if you don't support the people in the community or give them a way that by having these forested areas, these biodiversity corridors and other areas thriving, then they're not going to care for them. And so we're working with some groups now around what's called regenerative agroforestry. Obviously, I think a lot of folks have heard about regenerative agriculture, which is, it's not just no-till. There's a whole science around regenerative agriculture, and it's the right way to go. I was raised on a farm, so I understand this. But regenerative agroforestry is actually looking at how we can help what they call smallholder farms, which is usually 5 hectares or less. These are individuals slightly above subsistence farming, and they're taking care of their families just like any of the rest of us would. And when you're taking care of your families, sometimes you have to make hard decisions. We're trying to make it so that regenerative agroforestry can be brought to this group of individuals, and so that the trees that get planted can actually help and support all the things we've described: climate initiatives, water table stability, soil, improving the soil, being a biodiversity corridor or area biodiversity, but also provide these individuals with a way to generate some sort of agricultural revenue from these trees without having to cut the trees down or kill them.
Right.
And it can be a fruit product or other things, whether it's in a canopy or mushrooms growing from the soil underneath them, whatever it might be. And there's a whole host of ways to do that. And that's a new avenue that we're taking our land restoration around, is to try to find more impactful ways to help the community and the individual in those communities.
Yeah, and part of the agroforestry, I guess that it means, rather than planting, I don't know, let's say when we're planting a plantation forest, we might plant 5,000 to 10,000 trees per hectare, right? But if you're going to plant it in an agroforestry scheme, you might plant less trees so that the farmers can put some crops in between the trees. And the trees might be a mixture of fruit trees,
yep,
maybe nut trees, they might be timber trees, trees that the farmers can get some value from. And of course, valuable trees for the biodiversity that live there. It can't be all just 100% fruit trees, but getting that nice mix, maybe less trees over the land so that they can intercrop in between the trees.
Yep.
These are the sort of systems that you're talking about, Hank, right?
You can plant hedgerows or barriers to fields, and we're trying to share with these individuals that just how by doing this you can improve the soil, water retention, and what that all leads to is more yield from the crops that you're growing in your fields, as well as being able to take some sort of crop, whether it's, as you said, a fruit or whatever, from where these regenerative agroforestry is installed. So we're promoting all of this, and we're also sharing with our donors and supporters that it's the total restoration of the landscape that's the issue. It's not just going out and saying, oh, we're going to plant 10,000 trees and 200 acres or so. It's much bigger than that. It's total land restoration. Everything from the microorganisms in the soil all the way through the birds and the wildlife that thrive once we've established these areas. So
right.
So the message, and I will go back to the founder. The founder came up with a great idea to get people thinking about this and understanding how trees can play a significant and one of the more important roles in climate and carbon sequestration and mitigating our climate issues that are going on the planet. But now that we have this group of followers, the issue now is to make them understand and help them understand that this is a little bit more complex than just give us $1, we'll plant a tree.
Yeah, I think that's right. And this is the strategy going forward, right? How long have you been there in the position, Hank?
I was recruited a little over a year ago. So I started on January 1 of 2024.
Right, so just over a year. So I know that you're putting together this strategy, and the strategy very much is this more deeper approach. I was going to say complex. It is more complex, but it's a deeper approach than just, we'll go out and plant a couple of trees and we'll report on that for you. And it makes it a very simple thing. You gave us that money, we went and planted that number of trees. Everyone's a winner. But as you say, if those landscapes aren't properly restored in a way that the communities can thrive in them, as well as, of course, and when we say communities, we're human communities, non-human communities, all the different species, the birds and plants and other animals, if they can all thrive together, then we're talking about restoration and really healing the planet, right? There's a lot of degraded land out there. There's a lot of unproductive land that communities maybe have overfarmed in the past or overgrazed, or there's been terrible fires. This is the work of One Tree Planted Now. And you're 10 years in the business, just over. You've only been here a short time, Hank, but what are your goals for the next 10 years? Where do you want One Tree Planted to be in 10 years from now?
Well, we already are considered one of the leaders in the field, and it's mainly because of our communications and how we promote the organization. I think there's one thing I've always loved about tree people is that while they're all very intelligent, they also are very cooperative. I've been working with a lot of folks in our field, and they all keep saying the same thing. Let's find ways where we can partner. Let's find ways where we can help one another. There's so much work that needs to be done. Let's find ways to support. I want One Tree Planted to be one of those catalysts that help bring organizations together. We've got a couple of initiatives we're trying to make materialize for a couple of partners right now. I won't name who they are, but we're speaking with them and looking at ways that we can work together. I hope to see that the goals of AFR 100 are reached, and that we have played a role in that. It's 100 million hectares in Africa. There's so much more that I'd like to see done in the Andes. And to be perfectly honest with you, there's so much more I'd like to see in the United States. The interesting thing that I realized is after the LA fires, it was made world famous just this past spring. We were getting all kinds of contributions. We want to give you funding to support restoring the fire damage in Southern California. And we said, well, we're grateful for it, but if you give us the dollars now, you have to realize they're not even going to be ready to restore those areas for another 2 years, maybe even longer. And there's reasons for it. There's infrastructure that has to, just all the complexities before you're even ready to put a tree in the ground. But I did share with them, I said, do you realize that there's basically 1.6 million acres in California that have been, this is a round number, 1.6 million acres in California that are still suffering from the devastation of previous fires, and that the production and the nursery production capabilities of restoring those are not there. It basically, with the current capacity, it would take about 14 years. If no other fires took place in California, it would take about 14 years to restore what is existing damage there. And so we were able to convince a lot of our donors to give us support to continue our work in California. So I could rattle off, here's how many hectares I would like to see us have restored, or how many trees we'd like to plant. I think that's maybe not the right goal. I would like to see that landscape restoration on a broad scale is brought to the forefront of not just individuals, but our political leaders, and that they understand that this is absolutely critical to the health of all humans on the planet and to the GDP of our countries. One study I just saw that indicated that for every degree Celsius in temperature rise, it will reduce the GDP of, on average, globally by 1% to 2%. That's trillions upon trillions of dollars, and in some nations, it could be as much the GDP for 1 degree Celsius rise in average climate temperature for the planet could reduce their GDP by 10 to 15%. I mean, so when you start to think about it from a political and economic perspective, I think restoring landscapes is probably one of the smartest things that we as humans and we as leaders and we as nations and political leaders could really be focused on. And so I'd like to see that become forefront. And I'd like to make sure that One Tree Planted is playing a significant role in making that happen. So that would be my goal. I do have numbers in my head of how many trees, how many hectares, but I think there's a bigger issue than just One Tree planting so many trees and restoring so many hectares. It needs to be a global movement and a global focus.
Yeah. I absolutely agree with you, and I think you're well placed to be a catalyst for that. Absolutely, and given your experience, your track record, the platform that you've got, lots of supporters, pretty exciting, Hank. And I know you've got You've got a great team there. But talk about the team. Let me know, what sort of people have you got there working in One Tree Planet? I mean, I often get young people come to me and say, oh, how did you get started in your work? And I'm interested in the personal journey. So, let's start with yourself. What was your journey to One Tree Planted?
I grew up working on a farm, a dairy farm, in a large-scale apple and peach orchard. I milked cows. We actually farmed the land in order to, it was about 1,000 acres. And you had to farm the land. And I just started to question a little bit about farming practices that we were doing. And then the other aspect was I really enjoyed working in the orchards. I really enjoyed the pruning work, the harvesting, and taking care of the trees. Just as a side note, and it's probably the best advice my father ever gave me, although I didn't like it at the time, I was really into sports. Like most young men, I was very good at a couple of sports. And when I went to college, my father said to me, and I was playing sports in college, he goes, "You're not big enough, strong enough, or fast enough to make a living playing any of these sports that you like. So my advice to you is find something that you really like to do. That's what you should major in. And don't worry about if you're going to make X number of money, because life's about enjoying your work." And I listened to him. I guess a lot of sons are, at this age, I can say I did listen to him. I did not like his advice at the time, but I majored in horticulture and arboriculture because really I started to think about that and the suggestion he gave me. And I started to think back to what I really enjoyed up to that point. I really enjoyed working with the trees in the orchard. So that's what I majored in. I then started working. I had worked in the landscape field. I was an arborist, had a tree business where we were pruning people's trees and all young men climbing with ropes, so young men and women. It was fun. But then a mentor suggested to me that I had leadership capabilities and suggested that I look to get a master's degree. And I was invited to apply to what was called the Longwood Gardens Graduate Fellowship Program, which Longwood Gardens, a lot of folks in our world know what that is. That's the former estate of PRS DuPont. It's one of the finest horticultural facilities in the world. It's located just a little bit south and west of Philadelphia. Just absolutely incredible facility. And they train people to be leaders in public horticulture. And I went through the process, and the hardest interview, it was a 3-day interview, the hardest interview I've ever been through. And I got accepted. And 2 years later, they had to kick me out because I didn't want to leave. It's such a beautiful place. And that led me down the path to run public gardens. I've also followed my passion around the environmental issues and farming issues. So I led an organization called Farm Sanctuary, looking to inform people about some of the things that factory farming are doing and what alternatives are to that. I then was very interested in biodiversity and was concerned about the loss of biodiversity in the world, and led an organization called Wild Aid, which was really designed to inform people about literally the loss of not just the habitat, but of the wildlife globally, both the marine and the terrestrial wildlife. And I got recruited to come here to One Tree Planet, and I think all of my background has kind of brought me here. So that's kind of how I've gotten here, and I think it's given me a good background and what we're trying to accomplish, both from tree issue, environmental climate issues, biodiversity issues, and agricultural issues, regenerative agroforestry. So that's my story, and it's other members here. We have a lot of very, very talented and incredibly talented people from all over the world that are just committed to doing anything they can to reduce the climate situation that we're currently faced with, reduce the temperature of the planet. The simplest and easiest and probably the smartest way to do it is by restoring landscapes, which restores soil, restores the water, allows the trees to grow. They sequester carbon, and it keeps the planet, it's the lungs of the planet. It keeps it going. A lot of folks on our team that's the whole reason they're here. And they come from a variety of backgrounds, but this mission has brought them here. Several other folks that are working with me. we have a very strong communications arm, very talented group of marketing communications people. And the head of it has worked with me on several other organizations. And she came from Manhattan. She came from working in the for-profit marketing and communications world. We have individuals who have come that are running the business side of things that have MBAs from some of the best schools in the country, and everything in between. So it's a wonderful group of people, and literally to a T, they're all dedicated to what this mission is about, and they all have wonderful individual stories, much more interesting than mine.
I think yours is pretty interesting too, Hank. Good on you. And, you mentioned about the passion of the people. And I often have a situation, particularly where young people, not always, sometimes it's older people as well, who want to get into sustainability things and perhaps set up their own organisation. They come to me and they say, what should we do? What's the important thing? And often the challenge with sustainability is there's so many aspects to it. You could be interested in trees, you could be interested in oceans, you could be interested in the air, you could be interested in all sorts of rivers. And I always say to people, do what burns you. And I said it's got to be beyond passion, because absolutely guaranteed when you go into this journey, it's not about if, it's about when you'll hit a wall and you'll hit a difficulty. And those walls and difficulties come in many different ways. And sometimes they could be in the form of a recalcitrant organisation who doesn't want to change, or who's doing harm to the thing that you really love, and you've got to work with them and you've got to try and help them to find a different way. Maybe your budgets will get cut. You've got a great program, and then one of your partners will say, oh, no, I'm not going to do that anymore. And if you're not absolutely committed to it, like on a life's journey, and as you described your life's journey, when you learnt about the passion for trees, I think, that's when I see these organisations just fail and they just fall over. And that's why I say, well, if you're going to do that, you're better off not starting. Like, only go into it if you're going to be able to forge through those absolutely despairing and difficult times that absolutely guaranteed await you when you go on these journeys. And I'm sure in your journey you've seen a lot of times like that, Hank, where things just, seem so despairing and, you don't know the way forward. But because you're so passionate about the issue, you find a way. And it seems to me that this is certainly, I feel that's been part of your journey. But I'm sure, in my discussions with the people on the One Tree Planted team, that they're doing this not just because they're passionate about it, because it absolutely burns them, and they get out of bed every day to try and make the world a better place, and it's really fantastic. And I wonder, as you look forward, and you've got this time ahead of you. We've talked about the plans and the strategies. What's going to drive you through those difficult moments, which we know they're going to come? What's going to get you through that, Hank? What's your deep? I'd even say this, in a spiritual sense. What's that spiritual connection you have to nature that it's going to help you and your team? Because no man is an island, or no person is an island, right? So what's going to get you all through these difficult times that lay ahead?
You're a very wise man, Scott, because you're absolutely right. I've been doing this work for a long time, and there are always hurdles, and some of them are harder to see a way out of than others. For me, the way it's worked is I have felt strongly drawn to the missions of the organizations I've been working with. And it really comes down to that. It comes down to, for me personally, I've been drawn to, as I think I've alluded to, looking at better ways to do agriculture and to provide healthy food for our population, biodiversity and the wellness of the planet so that wildlife can exist. And I see the key to all of this as trees in one way, shape, or form. And so despite the hardships that are going to come, I mean, you're running a business, as you know, the fun part for me is planting the trees, or planning to plant the trees. The hard part is running the business and making sure that you're taking care of all of your people, making sure that the revenue is coming in that you need to come in, learning how to pivot, because you're going to run into hurdles that you have to pivot around without getting off course of ultimately what you're trying to accomplish. So I think the perseverance is maybe the thing that comes to my mind. Is you have to feel in your heart strongly about the mission, enough that you're willing to commit your life to it. And that's really what we do anyways as humans, whether we realize it or not. I mean, sometimes we just get a job and we go to work. But maybe the advice the story I told you about my father and advice he told me, find something for which you have passion about, major in it, and you'll be happy in your life. Don't worry about necessarily how much money you're going to make. It's really about the work that you do with your life and the people that you impact. And I think that's maybe the best advice anyone has ever given me about a career. Find something for which you're passionate. Make sure you take care of the people that you're working with, and whom you're trying to support. And life has an interesting way of finding a way to make it all happen. And don't despair. I mean, that's the other aspect is you have to stay positive and look for, there's always a solution to whatever challenges you're faced. It's just a matter of if your heart and your mind is open enough to hear it and see it. And it's tough work, but I guess that's the way I would say how we're doing it. I will say that's the people that I'm working with right now, to the T, they all see it that way. And that's how they live their lives.
Yeah. Well, I think we're all lucky to have an organisation like One Tree Planted, but we're even more lucky to have an organisation like One Tree Planted, being run by people like yourself and everyone else in the team there to take it forward. I know there's absolute commitment to the cause, and it is a very challenging cause. I've been working in the forest and tree space for decades now, and it does break your heart sometimes when you see things that are unfolding. But when you see that there's people like yourselves in there getting up every day to try and get these trees planted, get landscapes restored, working with communities, thinking about the biodiversity, it really creates a great beacon of hope. And so I'm really grateful to you, Hank, for that work, and to the rest of the One Tree Planted team, and also to all of those amazing people who support your work. The companies obviously that support your work,
yeah.
But as you say, 1 million people, 1 month just, sending in small donations and things like this. And I don't doubt meaningful donations for them. And so, in tough times, the donations are still coming in, and that shows great hope. I think it's easy to get somewhat despairing about people say, oh, people don't care, apathy and all the rest of it. Well, you know what? When you see the sort of mums and dads and people that support the work of One Tree Planted, you realise that there are people in the world that care a lot, and they give what they can give. And when you've got organisations like you guys making sure that money goes to the right places and to the right projects, to the right communities, the right partners, we can make the world a better place. So it's a great privilege for me to be on the board of One Tree Planted and to be able to support this journey. So Hank, thanks very much for joining us on the podcast today. And look, absolutely, we'll talk again in the future, and we'll have an update on where things are at. And I look forward to sharing with the listeners just some little snippets of news about projects that you're all doing, the One Tree Planted is doing in other parts of the world. So big thanks to you, Hank, for being in the organisation, taking it forward, and to the whole team and all the supporters that you're involved with. So, yeah, thanks so much, mate.
Thank you, Scott. Thanks for doing this, and thank you for your kind words and for supporting us by being on our board and helping us. So I appreciate it all. Thank you.
Very good. Well, thanks a lot, Hank, and good luck.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.